Hello, and welcome to the Business Academy. Today we're going to focus on creating AR and AP transactions, or accounts receivable and accounts payable transactions in business. Topics will be covered today include setting up printable formats, creating and editing transactions, and making deposits and transfers. So with that, I'd like to jump right in and visit an area of the system in which we can view all of our transactions. We can find this by clicking on the Accounting tab and Transactions from the dropdown. By clicking Search, we can view all of our transactions, and this is what we call the transactions list. Here we can view and search transactions that have been created in business. This page displays information about each transactions, and you may notice that the transaction number is a hyperlink. This enables you to view the transaction by clicking on the hyperlink, which will populate the transaction in another tab. So here we can view all the details of the particular transaction. And because it opens up in another tab, we can simply close the tab to go back to the transactions list. Now there are also hyperlinks for the customer and vendor name, which will populate their information. So for instance, if I click on Verizon, I can view all the information related to that customer and or vendor. And again, because it is in another tab, we can simply just close to go back to the transactions list. Now, other things found here are the transaction date. The type of transaction is located on the far left. Any memos that have been entered for the particular transactions will be entered in the middle. And on the very far right is the amount per transaction. Now we can also expand our view to enable us to see more transactions. So for instance, if I choose 200, this will expand the number of transactions on the particular page. And as we scroll down, we can see all that are available. And also at the very top, we have our search filters. And this will enable us to search for individual transactions or anything that fits the criteria in which we're searching for. So here we can search for a transaction number. We can filter by a transaction type. So here I can uncheck all and just choose specific transaction types and click search. And this will only show anything that matches the criteria that we've chosen and hide everything else from our view. I can also choose date ranges from the calendar features. I can search for a particular memo as well. I can also search by customer and vendor that's related to the transaction. And if I click this little blue arrow to the left, we can expand more search filters. And here I can choose to search by the amount, a particular line item on the transaction. If it's an employee check, like this reimbursable check, I can search for an employee as well. And I can also search by review status and whether it's been voided or not voided. Now the categories will be our GL categories, and if we're tracking those, we can select our GL categories to see what is charged to a particular GL category in our system. Now there are also imports available. And if I click the imports, there are 3 particular imports available to us, which are invoices, payments, and journal entries. And each one will have mapping. So for instance, if I click invoices, we have a select feature, so we can select from our PC for a list of imports. We also have this little cloud feature, which will download a sample CSV file, which downloads at the bottom, so we can open it. And here we have a lot of column headers that we can fill in with basic information. And if we want to see the information in a preview, we can hit the little window icon. And this is a list of all the column headers in our CSV file, the data type, so we have alphanumeric, date fields, yes and no fields, the max length, and also the description, which is what we're going to put in each column per transaction. So with the invoice number goes with the invoice number, the customer name goes with the customer name, and so on and so forth. And as we're filling out our CSV spreadsheet, we can save, select it from our PC, and then start the import process. Now that same process is available for all three of the imports. So if I go to payments, we can view our mapping for payments. So you can see the column headers have changed. We can also download a sample CSV file and select from our PC. And that is also available for the journal entries. So now that we know where to search for journal entries and particular transactions, now I'd like to jump into demonstrating creating different transactions in business. And to create transactions, you can use one of two ways to do this. One is to create a transaction using either the accounting tab. For instance, under accounting, we can create journal entries, checks, credit card charges. Under customers, we can create invoices. So we can create an invoice, a time and expense invoice, a finance charge invoice, and we can also create credit memos, sales receipts, and we can also receive payments. Apart from the top tabs to create different things, we can also use the quick add, which is this little plus icon to the right of our name. And here will allow us to quickly add anything from this dropdown. And we can see transactions are sprinkled throughout. So here we can create a bill, we can create an invoice, receive a payment, create a sales receipt, create a check, a credit card charge, and a journal entry. So first I'd like to jump into checks. And if we quickly want to create a check by using the check feature from the dropdown, this brings us to a blank check screen. Now here we have a lot of information. Up top, we have our bank account. So this will be the bank account we're going to use to issue the check. And we can change that from our dropdown here. And we can choose any bank account from the dropdown that we so choose. And the ending balance will change on the right as we choose our bank accounts. If we want the check to be printed, we can check the to be printed screen. And this will add it to our print checks queue. And we also have a recall last feature. So as we're adding a customer and or vendor, the recall last will recall any check that was last made for that particular customer or vendor. Now, this screen is where we can choose a customer, vendor, or employee. And each of those entities will have different logos on the far right. And we can load more by clicking the items down here, and we'll load more on our search. Now, customers have the red C, vendors have the purple V, and employees will have a yellow E as their icons. Now, as I choose an entity, it'll be added to our check. Our date we can change with the calendar feature. Since we have to be printed on, the check number disappears. If we want to enter a check number, we can simply uncheck to be printed, and now we can enter another check number. And now as we scroll down, we also have a memo field, so we can enter anything related to the check. And down here is our methods of issuing the check. So we can either create a check for expenses, in which we'll choose a GL account from our system. Or we can add an item. So if I click items over here, we'll be able to select an item from our items list and issue the check for that. So for instance, if I choose labor, I can then choose a customer and order. So once I choose the customer, the order will drop down here. And then I can associate an order that's been associated with that customer. And if I want to bill, there's a billable column here. And if I want to bill Joe's Crab Shack for this particular labor, I can select billable. And I can also change my quantity as I need. And my unit cost. Now in my Business Academy system, I'm choosing to track GL categories. So you'll see over here we have a category column, and you'll see categories required since I'm requiring GL categories to be tracked at the line item level. So here I can choose my GL category for that particular line item. If you are tracking GL categories and you want to affect all of the line items at once, we can also do a default category up here, and that'll change all of our items listed here as well. So now that I have my items added and I'm choosing to bill Joe's Crab Shack for the labor, I am now ready to go ahead and save. Now once I save, you'll notice that we have some more top tabs up here, and this is all information related to the check itself. So if I choose the related to, this will pull in any related transactions to this particular check. If I choose to share, I can copy and paste this URL and send it to anybody I'd like in terms of internal users in either a message or an email. The history will show me changes. So if I decide to go ahead and make a change, let's make this 7 and click Save. If I want to view the history of the check, I can click History. And now I'll get 2 separate ways to view the check in terms of when it's been created and when it's been modified. And this will let me know not only the changes that have been made, but also who made the changes. So here we can see 2 separate ways of viewing the check. We can view the original check, so we can see it was created by me. And here's all the information related to the check. And if I go to the current, you'll see that the created by has been changed to modified by, and the changes will be highlighted in orange. Now from here, if I want to return to the check, all I need to do is click the Return to Check button, and we'll be brought right back to that particular transaction. Now I can also set a check as recurring, and to do this, I can choose Set as Recurring, and this will initiate a pop-up screen. So here I can choose my frequency in terms of whether I want this to recur on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or a monthly basis. And for each option I choose, my recurrence options will change. So monthly, I can choose, for instance, the first Monday of every 1 month. I want this to recur. I can choose to end after 3 recurrences. So after 3 months, this recurrence will end. I can choose no end date as well, or I can choose an end by date and choose that from the calendar feature. Now if I choose weekly, this will allow us to choose when it recurs on. So I can say every week, every 1 week on Tuesday or Thursday. I can choose any option from the days here. And I have the same options for the end date, whether I want to do end after such and such recurrences, or I want to choose an end by a specific date, or if I want a no end date. I can also choose when the recurrence starts on. So if I want this to start, say, next Tuesday, I can choose that from the calendar feature as well. Now the last one is daily. And daily will allow us to recur either every day or every weekday. And if I want this to be every other day, I can choose 2 days, or every 4 days I want this to recur. And we also have the same ending options here as well. Now by clicking OK, we'll be brought back to the check screen, and our recurrence will be noted in blue. Now the other top tabs that we have are also very helpful. One is the attachments. So here we can add any attachment for the particular check, such as receipt or a timesheet or something like that. We can add from our PC. We have a lot of extensions available, as you can see here, and the max file size per file is 10 megabytes. Now we also have an audit log, and this shows changes made to the check. And lastly, our posting journal, and this will show movements to and from our GL accounts associated with the particular check. The Actions tab will allow us to copy the check and also void the check. Now by choosing Save and Close, we'll be brought back to the check screen, and we can search to view all of our checks as well. Now from the check screen, we can search for a particular bank account to view its activity. We can search the status, whether it's active or has been voided. We can search for who created the check. And again, this little blue arrow will expand more search filters to show date ranges we can search for as well. Now I hinted towards something a little earlier called the Print Checks queue. And to view the Print Checks queue, we can go to Accounting, and we have a queue section underneath here, and you'll see Print Checks is located underneath that section. So here I can view all the checks that need to be printed, and I can also choose from my bank account here. And if I want to show checks that have been previously printed so I can print them again, I can choose this little box here and click Search to show all the checks that have been printed previously. Now with each check, you'll see who this check is being paid to, the check date, who was created by. The already printed status will be located here, and the amounts will be on the far right. Now these arrows will populate the check itself. So for instance, if I want to view the check to Verizon, I can click the arrow, and it'll bring me right to the check in a new tab. And here I can see all the details related to the check. Now, if I want to go back, I can simply close out that tab. Now, if I want to print out anything again, I can simply choose which checks I want to print and click Print from the drop-down. Now, this will initiate a pop-up in which we can choose our format, so whether we want to print in a standard format or a voucher. Now, here we can also choose with a standard how many checks are going to be printed on a page, the starting check number, and here we can also adjust our alignment for things like the customer name, the customer address, the written total, the numeric total, the date, the memo, and the signature. And we can also sign the signature here, and we can also use Save Signature. Now, if I don't want to use Save Signature, I can uncheck that, and this will enable me to sign again. And just by using our mouse, we can go ahead and sign the screen once again. Now, if I choose Print, it'll go ahead and print off those checks, and they'll download them in our browser down here, which we can then view what they look like and print off in our printer. Now, apart from checks being very important, arguably a very important transaction for any business is an invoice. And we can create an invoice by using the quick add to choose invoice, or we can also choose the customers and create invoice underneath financials. Either way will bring us to a blank invoice page, in which then we can add our customer who we're going to charge the invoice to, their bill to ship to, if they have one, will be added here. If we need to quickly add one, we can go over to the Hover Plus option and simply add a new location. Now, if we add a new location, we can name it whatever we want. I'll just name this primary. And I can either enter a manual address or I can search for an address. So for instance, if I search 20 Main Street and click the magnifying glass, Google will try to find any address that matches that criteria. And we can choose Select to add that address, or we can choose Select and Edit to go ahead and edit that address more. So if I choose Select, it'll automatically add that address. And by choosing Save and Close, it'll add it to our bill to, and we can also add it to our ship to. We can change our sales rep. By default, this is whoever is creating the invoice, but we can change it as we need by erasing and choosing another employee from the dropdown. Now on the right are the invoice details. So we have the invoice date, the payment terms, the invoice number, an order that is tied to the invoice, the format for the order, and any memo tied to the invoice as well. Now our date will default to the date we're creating the invoice. If we want to change that, we can use the calendar feature and choose a date that we're adding the invoice for. And because our payment terms are net 30, the due date is automatically calculated based on those payment terms. Now if I change to net 10, we'll note that our due date has changed to 8/26. And same with net 45, our due date will change to net 30. And if we go back to net 30, it'll go back to 9/15. Now our invoice date is based on the last invoice number. And if we create this invoice, the next invoice after this will be 26, and so on and so forth. Now if we had an order for Yolanda Steakhouse, we could add that down here. Since there are no orders, we can't tie anything to it. But if there was an order for this particular customer, we could attach the invoice to that order. Now, if you want to print off this invoice, you can do so here, and that'll be added to the print invoice queue. We can also set as recurring, and the recurring settings that we saw on the checks will all be present here in terms of our monthly, weekly, and daily recurrences. Now down here, we can choose our default GL category if we're tracking that information. And this will add automatically to any line items that we add to the invoice. And down here are the items section. So here we can add items that we're going to associate with the particular invoice. And you'll see as I add things, because I've added the GL category, it automatically associates that category with each item that I add. Now, inventory items will allow you to select from a location if you have multiple inventory locations in your business system. So for iPad, for example, I can choose Select and choose which location this is going to be extracted from. Now, this report will show you the quantity that you have on hand, which means the quantity that you have in stock. And it'll also show you the quantity that is available. And the quantity that is available is a little different from the quantity on hand, because the quantity available shows you what's not allocated to either a sales order or an invoice. Now, if I choose this particular showroom, we can add that to the invoice, and you'll see showroom populates for the location. And I can also do that for the improved iPad. I can choose what location it's coming out of, press Select, and automatically associates that. Now, because I've added an item group, we can click Configure, and this will allow us to view all the details within our item group. And here we can differentiate the prices, the quantities, and also the GL categories. And as I update the item group, you'll note that the price has changed. Now by default, the sales taxes will go to our default tax. But if you want to change that, we can simply click the hyperlink for the tax and choose what sales tax we're going to affect for this particular invoice. And by choosing that particular tax rate, the tax will adjust. Now for any item on the invoice, if we don't want to charge sales taxes, all we have to do is simply uncheck the taxable box, and no sales taxes will be charged for those particular line items. And if we're ready to create the invoice, we can click Save. Now after we click Save, you'll notice that we have a lot of top tabs. So just like the checks, we have a related to, and the related to will be found on every transaction within business, and that will show you transactions related to the transaction that you're viewing. So for instance, if we had an order attached to the invoice, we could see the order that is related to this invoice. The share will allow us to copy and paste the URL into an email and message and send to an internal user. We have the history to show modifications to the transaction. Our posting journal will show changes in all the GL accounts and see the differences in debits and credits because we're adding different items to that particular invoice. The audit log will show changes that have been made. We can attach anything that we would like, including a picture or a document, using the attachments. We can also see applied credits and payments. So if we apply a credit memo or receive a payment and apply it to the invoice, they will be linked here, and we can view that with the applied credits and payments. Now, if we want to email the customer contact, we can choose email. And now because this contact for this particular customer doesn't have an email, I won't be able to demonstrate that. But we can email the customer contact using the email function. And the print will allow us to print in any invoice format that we see down here below. So for instance, if I choose invoice from the dropdown, this will download in our browser and we can view a PDF format of the invoice. Now, if we want to view more information in terms of our invoice formats, such as how we built this format in particular, we can do that via the settings, which I'll show just after we go after the actions menu. Now, last but not least in the invoice is the actions. And here we can receive a payment for the invoice. We can issue a credit memo for the invoice. We can copy the invoice. And lastly, we can void the invoice. Now, if I choose Receive Payment, this will bring us to another tab. And since we're receiving the payment for the invoice, the customer will be chosen and locked. We can choose our payment method from the dropdown. We can choose the customer contact, the payment date, the amount that we received from the customer, and we can enter any reference number that we'd like as well. Now up top, we can add attachments. So we can choose anything from our PC. And by clicking Save, we'll be able to save and receive that payment from the customer. And you'll notice the payment amount is $1,330. The payment that we used for the invoice was the total, and the payment remaining for the invoice is $0. So now if we click the Related To tab, you'll see that invoice is in the Related To, and we can click on the invoice number to go right to that particular invoice. And if I click Applied Payments and Credits, here's the payment that is applied, And if we need to, we can unapply the payment as well by clicking unapply. And because everything is connected, if I do related to, we'll see that payment and the related to. So now I'd like to go into the company settings and show you a little bit more about the invoice formats and how they can be set up and created in our settings. So I can do this by clicking Company and Settings. Now to view our printable formats, we can click Accounting, AR or Accounts Receivable, Invoices, and Invoice Formats. Now, if we want to search within the settings, I can go up here to Search Settings, and I can type Format, and anything matching that criteria will be highlighted in green. So if I quickly want to find invoice formats, I can search Format or Invoice, and then I can click Invoice Format. So now this is a list of all our printable formats that we've already set up. And we can view them by clicking on the name of the particular format. We can copy the format by clicking the 2 pages, or we can deactivate by clicking the trash can. Now, if I want to add a brand new invoice format, I can go ahead and click the Add button. So here we can name the new format and click Save. And once we click Save, we'll be able to add our new sections. Now within an invoice, we have 3 main sections that we can add. One is a content section, the other is an item column section, and the last is a totals section. So if I click Add, I can choose what type of section. And if I choose Content, this is where I can really customize my header. Now with every content section that you add with the invoice format, you can add merge fields. And merge fields will pull over information related to either your company, the invoice, as well as the customer information. So for instance, if I choose merge fields, I can go ahead and add my company logo, which is located over here on the top left of your business system. I can add my company primary address, my company primary phone. If I scroll down, I can see all the invoice information. So this will pull over the invoice date, the invoice number, the invoice total, the open balance. If the invoice is tied to an order, I can show the order information with anything that says order. And as I scroll down, I can add my payment terms, a PO number if we have a PO attached, the shipping address for the particular customer, the shipping location name, and also a terms and conditions if we're attaching any terms and conditions. Now up top, we also have the billing address and the billing location as well. So the account name will be the customer name. So if I choose account name, I'll also add the billing address, and then I can also add the shipping address here. When I choose Save and Close, we'll be able to go back and you'll notice that that section has been added to our format. And if I click Add, we can add item columns. And this will pull over all our item information from the invoice. So here we can add columns that will pull over the item name, the item description, the quantity, the rate, and also the full amount. And we can also add the taxable information, whether it's taxed or not, and also the fulfillment date if we're tracking fulfillment dates on the line item level. Now these can all be rearranged. So if I drag and drop, you'll notice a dotted line appears, and this will preview for where this is dropped in the columns. So if I drop it in between the item quantity and the description, you'll note now the fulfillment date has changed. And we can also add that to the very bottom. We can rename any of these columns as well. And we can also remove anything that we want by choosing the X, and then we'll add it back to the available columns list. Now our header background, we can change to anything within the color options that we have below. So here, if I want this to be a kind of a light green, we can change that. We can change the font color for all these item column headers. We can also change the font itself, as well as the font size. If I choose Save and Close, that next section will be added to our invoice format. And if I want to add totals, I can choose Totals and Save and Close. Now, if you want to customize what your totals section looks like, you can click on the Totals section again. And this will allow you to hide multiple different options within your invoice. So you can hide the subtotal, you can hide shipping, sales taxes, the actual total of the invoice, you can hide any payments, and you can also hide the open balance. So this will allow you to hide any information. So for instance, if I don't charge sales taxes, I'd like to hide that information, I can go ahead and choose that on the Hide in the Total section. Then by clicking Save and Close, that total section will be added. And if I want to add a footer, I can just choose Content again. I can add anything. Any small little message. And I can also change my fonts. By choosing Save and Close, that last section will be added to our invoice. Now you can also rearrange these as well. So if you want to rearrange the way your invoice looks, we can rearrange the content sections as well. Now by choosing Save and Close, we'll be able to go back to our invoice format list, and that new invoice format will be added to the list. Now with all of our transactions, the printable formats are all the same in terms of how they function. You can add contents, item sections, and total sections. And if I choose formats, I'll show you all the formats that we have available. So we can customize our purchase order formats, our credit memo formats, our invoice formats, sales order formats, and sales receipt formats. And all of these act the exact same way in terms of adding your sections, adding merge fields for your contents, hiding items in your total sections, and adding what you want to display in your item columns. So now if I go back to an invoice, so let's go back to the transactions list. I'll show only invoices. And now here's that invoice that we made just earlier. And if I click on the hyperlink, we can go there. And by clicking the print, now we have that new invoice format. And if you want a preview of what that looks like, we can download it into our browser. And we can click on it as long as it downloads. And here's the preview of what that looks like. So all these merge fields are pulling over all the information that we've added. So we have the logo pulling over, our primary address, our customer name, their billing address, their shipping address, and here's all the item totals and the total section, and here's our closing footer message. So you can really customize what your invoices, your sales orders, and any other format looks like within the settings. So now that we've received a payment for our invoices, I next like to jump into our deposits. Now our deposits are located underneath accounting. So if I click accounting, you'll see a banking section here. And right in between the credit card checks and transfers, we have deposits. So when I click deposits, we'll be brought to our deposit screen. And here I can search for any deposits that have been previously made. And just like the transactions list, the deposit number is a hyperlink, so we can view that particular deposit and all the details within it. Now, if I go back to the deposits list, we can also add a brand new deposit by clicking add. So right automatically, as soon as you click add, anything that has been undeposited will pop up in which you can choose to deposit. So if I choose the Yolanda Steakhouse payment method, we can go ahead and add to deposit. And here we have the amount of the payment that we received. We'll note the payment method was cash. We have the GL account that's associated with the deposit and who it's received from. Now, if we have anything that we also like to deposit, we can click Add Undeposited Items, and the same pop-up will appear. And here we can choose from transaction dates. We can search for a customer, and we can also search payment methods as well. Now, along with adding undeposited items, we can also add manual items. If we click manual items, we'll get a list of new things to add. And here we can choose a GL account that we're depositing from. And we can choose any GL account that we have within our system to add to the deposit. We can choose our payment method, our amount, and our GL category is located on the far right. Now with the deposit, we'll have to note what bank this is going into. So here with the bank account, we can choose what bank we're going to deposit in. We can also choose our date for when the deposit goes into effect. So if I choose save, we can go ahead and deposit those funds into our bank account. And with the posting journal, we can make sure that everything is being affected correctly. We can view the audit log. So we'll see that the status has changed from undeposited to deposited. We can share by copying and pasting the URL into a message or email and send to any internal users. We can view related to, so here's that payment that is related to the deposit. Any deposit that you add will also be added to the related to with those deposits as well. We can add attachments. And with the actions, we can void deposit if we so choose as well. Now by choosing Save and Close, we'll be brought back to the deposited screen. Now, apart from invoices, another helpful AR transaction or accounts receivable transaction are credit memos. And credit memos can be used to credit a customer's invoice, for example, or give an account credit to a customer. We can create a credit memo by going to Customers and Create Credit Memo underneath the Financial section. This will bring us to a brand new credit memo in which we can choose a customer from the dropdown. We can choose their bill to information or quickly add a bill to here. So here I'll choose primary and I'll search the settings again. So by typing in a street name, I can click the magnifying glass and Google will search for any address that matches. I can simply choose select to add that address and choose Save and Close. It'll be automatically added to my build to, and I can also add it to my ship to. On the right, we can change the date for the particular credit memo. We can change the credit memo number as well. We can associate an order for the credit memo, choose a credit memo format, add a memo for the credit memo, and down here is the items section. So here we can add what we're crediting the customer for. So let's say we sold them an iPad and it's damaged. We want to credit them for that cost. We can credit them for the amount that they paid. We can also take off tax if we want to, and you'll note that the tax has been subtracted as we uncheck that box. We can also change the tax agency. So since this particular customer is located in Massachusetts, we can choose out of state and update. Now, because this is an iPad, we can choose what location this is being associated with because it's an inventory item. And over on the right, again, because I'm choosing to track GL categories in my business system, I can choose that GL category for that particular line item. Now, when I choose Save, I'll have 3 options in which to issue the credit memo. So 1 is Apply to Open Invoices, and this will allow me to credit any open invoices that this particular customer has. I can also give a refund, which will issue a check to the customer. I can also keep as an open credit, which will credit this customer's AR in our business system. So for instance, if I choose Give a Refund, I'll be able to choose how we're refunding this information. So I can issue a check, a wire transfer, pay cash, or also ACH. Now if I choose check, we can choose which bank account we're going to pay this through. The ending balance will be located down below. We can change the check date as we need. We can change the refund amount as well. Our GL categories will be located here. We can also know whether we want this to be printed or not. Now in the memo, I can write anything like refund for iPad and choose Save and Close to go ahead and issue that refund check. Now a pop-up will appear to let you know that a check has been created from your bank account, and you can print the check and mail it. And to do that, we can go back to the Print Checks queue. So if we want to view that check, we can go to Accounting and Print Checks. We can choose the bank account that was associated with. And here we'll see that because it's a refund check, it was added to the Print Checks queue automatically. So to view that, we can view the Include Previously Printed Checks. And here's that check for Duffy Partners in Law for $600. So we can choose Print to go ahead and print that check. But you can also view it by choosing the arrow to bring us back to that particular transaction. Now, another helpful feature in terms of AR transactions are sales receipts. And if I want to create a new sales receipt, I can click Customers and create sales receipt. And here again, we can choose our customer, our line items, our reference number, the payment method in which we've received. So here if I choose the customer, now, if the customer has information already entered in business, it'll populate automatically. So here's the customer's bill to and ship to. Now, again, like any other transaction, the sales rep will default to the person making the transaction, but you can change that by erasing your name and choosing the employee from the dropdown located below. Now, if I want the sales receipt to be tied to an order, I can choose the order screen and choose an order from down below. I can write a memo. I can set my recurrences. And down here is where I can choose my items. I can change my unit prices per item, my quantities as I need. And I can also associate my GL categories. Now, as I choose Save, we'll go through a feature that we've added just in this past release, which is a warning about a reorder point. Now, I've added a Chromebook that had no quantity on hand, so this low warning stock will show me that I do not have enough stock to issue this sales receipt, and I can either override it by creating the sales receipt, or I can click Cancel, in which then I can either purchase more materials or create an inventory adjustment to reference our actual quantity in our physical location. Now, if I choose Cancel, this will not create the sales receipt, and I can go back and make my edits, or I can go ahead and create an inventory transfer or an inventory adjustment. And if I want to override that, I can click Save and just choose Create Sales Receipt. Now here we have all the related tabs that we saw in the other transactions, such as the related to. So since we tied that order, the order number will be here so we can quickly view that information with the hyperlink. We can share with the URL. We can view the modified history. We can see the posting journal to note what GL categories and GL accounts have been affected by the transaction. We can view the audit log to see changes, add any attachments. We can email the contact. So if I choose email, the contact will be added in the to. Now, if I want to edit the subject of the email, I can choose Edit Subject up here, and this will change the subject of the email. Now, if I want to edit the body of the email, I can click the Edit option down here, and this will allow me to edit any merge fields or any body information as well. So if I want to note that the public link is a link to view the receipt, I can add that in the body as well. And by clicking Preview, we can go back to the preview screen and view all of our changes. And if we're ready to send that to the contact, we can simply click Send. And the customer contact will get an email with all that related information. Now, if I want to print off the sales receipt, I can click Print. And with the Actions tab, I can copy and also void the sales receipt. If I choose Save and Close, we can go back to the transactions list. And the final AR transaction I'd like to demonstrate are journal entries. Now, journal entries can affect multiple different GL accounts and general ledger account types. So if I click Journal Entries and click Add Journal Entries, we can demonstrate this by choosing the dropdown. And here I can add really almost any account from our dropdown here. So I can add equity accounts. I can add a bank account, an expense account, an income account. Now, things that I will not be able to affect with a journal entry are things like accounts payable, accounts receivable, but everything else can really be affected with a journal entry. So if I want to adjust any funding with my net income or M&T Bank or credit card charges, I can enter them either in the debit or the credit side of the journal entry. So as I add in options here, we can go ahead and add all our funding in for these particular journal GL accounts. The debit and credit totals will be located right underneath the credit and debit options. And you'll see that if we erase the 50 here, you'll note the parentheses will dictate what the difference is between either the debits and or credits. And that difference will appear on either side that we have the difference located. If it's balanced, you won't see any parentheses, and you'll be good to go to make your journal entry. And if we need to do the GL categories, we can affect those with the line items as well. Now, a journal entry can also be set as recurring, and we can set that recurrence here. We can add attachments for the journal entry. And we can also import journal entry items as well. And we can do that by clicking on this blue button here. And from the drop-down, we can click any import sample that we have on file. We can download a CSV sample and view that information. So these are column headers that will fill in related information for those particular journal entries. And if we want to view all the column headers in a preview, we can view the mapping. And here we can see what we're going to fill in for that CSV file. So for each journal entry, we can simulate that with the GL account name, whether it's a debit or a credit, the memo, and a GL category name if we're tracking that in our business system. Now, if we switch over to the AP, we can demonstrate how to create such things as bills and also issue bill payments. So now to view bills, we can go to the Vendors tab, and underneath Financials, we can create a bill credit, create a bill for received items, and we also have pay bills and receive items. Now, if I want to create a bill, I can simply choose Create Bill from the drop-down. And here I can assign what vendor we're going to issue the bill to. We can choose a purchase order that's related to the bill. Now, the only thing that's really required on a bill is the vendor information. We can choose the shipping information, insert a tracking link if they've provided one for us. We can also change the date. The due date will change based on the payment terms. So if I choose net 25, we'll see the due date changes, and same with net 60. If I want to do a custom range, I can choose custom and choose anything from the calendar feature that I'd like. And if I go back to a net, we can adjust our payment terms and our due dates. Now the reference number we can add here as well as a memo. Now if this particular bill was tied to a transaction such as a purchase order, we could see the related transactions underneath this tab as well. Now the items section, we can start adding what we're going to be billed for from our vendor. So here we can add things like materials. We can choose how much we've received from our vendor, how much they cost us. We can bill a customer, and if we choose bill, we'll have to add a customer here. And then we can choose the order in which we're going to bill the customer. Now, if we don't want to bill, we can simply uncheck that billing option. And once again, because I am tracking GL categories in my system, I can associate that on the line item. Now, if I'm ready to create the bill for us to pay, I can simply choose Save. And you'll note that the status of the bill has changed to be paid, which means we still have to pay off this bill to our vendor. Now, vendors can also issue bills through the partner portal, and that's something we're going to cover next week in our customer session of our Business Academy. So we'll be going through the partner portal, what it looks like, what vendors and customer contacts can do within the portal. So if you'd like to see what they can do in terms of issuing bills or paying off invoices, for instance, you can join us in that Business Academy session, which I believe is next Monday. Now, all those top tabs will be located with a bill as well, so we can see any related to transactions. So if there was a purchase order related, we could see that here. We could share by copy and pasting the URL into an email or message. The posting journal will show our GL movements. We can message anybody using the message log as well. So if I choose new message, my recipients will drop down here. So I can choose any recipient that is located within the drop down. I can add my body in here, and I can also add attachments and choose send message. So if I choose send message, that will be tracked within the bill, and I can view all the replies and forwards as well. Now, because it's related to the bill, when Steve receives the email, it'll have a hyperlink to the bill so he can easily view that information. Now, we also have a notes log within bills, which is really handy as well. So this will let us input any information related to the bill and really track statuses of the bill. So if I said received bill from VinTag today, I will pay this off. When I click add, the note will be added below, and it will also be audited to show who entered it and when. And this will allow us to track exactly what's going on with the bill, and it'll allow us to view progress. Now, because we've entered a bill and a message, you'll see a number 1 located up here. And for a message, we can see replies, and that will go up to a number 2 if Steve replies. And as I enter more notes, the notes will go up in numeric value as well. Now, underneath the Actions tab of a bill, we can pay off the bill, we can copy the bill, and we can also void the bill. Now, if I choose Pay Bill from the Actions tab, I can easily pay off this bill, and you'll see that the bill is highlighted. If we had more bills here, we could check off each one. We could adjust the pay amount, so how much we want to pay off this bill. So I can change this to, say we want to pay off half. We can adjust the payment amount, and I can choose Pay Bills. Now, when I choose Pay Bills, we'll get a pop-up here. Now, if we've chosen more than one, each bill will be located down below. We can choose how we're going to pay off the bill. So if I choose check, for instance, then we can choose our bank account. The ending balance will be located below the bank that we're referencing. And here I can enter a memo as well. When I choose Pay, you'll note the bill disappears from our Pay Bill screen, and a check will be created to pay off the bill. So now if I go back to my Open tab over here, which is the transactions list, I can check bills, and we can view that bill that we recently added. So here it is. It's today's date, number 9, and here's the VIM tag. And if I click that transaction number, we can see that now the status has changed to pay. The audit log has jumped up to 2, and we note that the status has changed from to be paid to paid. And if I want to update my notes, I can go back in and add the note. Now, another thing we can do in terms of our accounts payable is receive items. Now, receiving items means that you've received items from your vendor that you've ordered, but you have not yet been billed for those items. Now, to simulate this, we can go to the Vendors tab and choose Receive Items down below. We can also create a bill for received items. So when I choose Receive Items, we can choose a vendor that we've received the items for. If they have a related purchase order, we can attach that here as well. And we can add our items. Now let's say we ordered an indoor security camera for our office. The quantity will note where this indoor security camera will be stocked within our location once we receive it. So rather than an invoice where you're extracting it, this is going to allocate the item to this particular location. So when it comes in, if I want to track this in my warehouse, I can choose my warehouse, and you'll note that that changes in the location. Now, let's say we're ordering 5. I can change my cost for how much I paid for each individual camera. We can change our date, and you'll notice that because we're receiving items, the received items checkbox is checked off by default. Now, as I choose Save, we'll have all the top tabs that we had previously, except for the notes and the messages. Now, since this is received items, again, this means that we've received items, but the vendor has not sent us a bill, or at least we have not received a bill yet, which means technically we don't have to pay for that yet. Now, once we receive the bill, all we have to do to make this a bill is really simple. We'll just uncheck the received bills, the received items, and now this received items becomes a bill. So if I go down and click Save, change my due date here. You'll note that now it's a bill to be paid. And we can go through the same workflow that we did to pay off the bill. And we can also copy or void the bill as well. So received items is really handy in terms of if you received the items, but you haven't received a bill from the vendor, you can go through the workflow of checking off this box. And just for a little more added security, this is also structured by permissions. So if you want some users to be able to check this on and off and you don't want some to be able to do that, you can dictate that via user roles and permissions. Now to see what permissions are allocated for this particular permission, we can do that by going to the gear icon and clicking Settings. And here we can view all the related permissions for that particular page. Now the received items is for bills add and edit. That will not allow them to add or edit a bill. Therefore, they cannot check on or off the received items. Now we also have a pending bills queue. So if I go to the vendors, we have queues for pending bills. If I view that and click search, we can view any bills that are pending. And what this means is that these are bills that go through an internal review process. So let's say that some of our sales reps are creating purchase orders and that they've received bills, but we want to make sure that they match the purchase orders that we've purchased from the vendors. So we have to internally approve them before we can pay them off to make sure that they're matching what we've actually ordered. We can send them through this workflow to internally approve bills and therefore go ahead and pay them off. So that's just an example in terms of why this might be used and where you can go ahead and internally review and approve the bills to pay off. Now, the other option we have under vendors is create credits. And this will create credits for our bills. And here we can choose the vendor. We can choose an expense, which is a GL account from an internal GL account from our chart of accounts. We can choose an item as well and add that from the drop-down. And if you want, we can also bill a customer by attaching the customer name and the order from the drop-down. So here, if I choose a vendor, the vendor location will pre-populate. And here I can just choose an item, choose my inventory location, and then adjust my cost. As I choose save, that bill credit will be created. And if I want to apply it to a bill, I can choose actions and apply to bills. Now, if the vendor has any open bills that we need to pay off, we can apply the credit to the bill. So let's assume that we've received an outdoor security camera from our vendor, but it's damaged, and they've issued us a credit, and we want to reference that in our business system. We can do that with a bill credit to credit what we owe to our vendors, essentially to reference their credit to us. So this will affect bills and actually take off what we owe for those particular bills. Now, if we want to view the posting journal for that, we can do that as well to view our account activities, as well as our GL accounts that have been associated with those particular entities. Now, the last transaction I want to demonstrate before we jump into some reporting is the financial transfers. So if I want to transfer funds between either banks or say from GL accounts to another GL account, I can click accounting, and underneath banking we have transfers. And here we can go to our fund transfers list, and this will allow us to view any transfers that were made previously. We can also use our search filters to search for any matching criteria, for instance, whether it's active or voided, our GL categories, date ranges, and who created the transaction. Now, if I click search, any previously made fund transfers will be located down below. We can view the actual transfer by clicking on the transfer date. And this will populate the transfer in the same window. And just by clicking close, we can go back to the transfer list. Now, if we want to add a brand new one, we can click the add button here. And this will take us to a blank transfer funds screen. So now the category, again, is our GL categories. Now the top option is the from account. So this is where the funds are coming from. So here I can choose anything. So let's say I'm going to transfer funds from one bank to another bank. I'll choose my from bank account as my bank, my to bank account as my M&T bank, and you'll note the account balances are on the right. Now let's say I want to transfer $100 from my bank to my M&T bank. We can put the transfer amount down here, and we can also add a memo. Now as I click save, you'll note that now that we've actually transferred funds, our totals have changed in the right to reflect that the $100 has moved from our bank to our M&T bank. If we want more detail, we can view the posting journal as well and view the debit and credit information. Now, in terms of reporting on some of the things that we saw today, if I click on the reporting tab, we can view transactions history. And the transaction history report will give us a list of transactions. We can actually see the modifications that have been going on with those particular transactions. So here I have the types listed down below on the left. The transaction number and date are in the middle columns. and the customer and vendor are on the far right. Now the transaction and the customer vendor are hyperlinked, so I can view that related information. But if I choose this down arrow, I can view details for the modifications of the particular transaction. And we can use search filters up here, and we can expand more by clicking on the blue arrow, and we can filter by types, transaction date, as well as the reviewed by. So this is for internal review, who reviewed that particular transaction. We can note with this drop down here. Now, another very helpful report in terms of purchasing, we can find under the purchasing tab, and we can view the stock status report. If I click search, I can view all our items, and now these are inventory items. So that's very important to note, because inventory items were actually tracking the on-hand quantities. And you'll note that the item is on the left, the category for the items is next to that. We have the on-hand quantity, what's allocated to purchase orders, what's allocated to sales orders, what's available. So this will be a on-hand minus sales orders plus purchase orders. So that's how we get that information. And then the reorder point is located here. And on the far right, we can see the reorder point and how far or close to the reorder point we are. So a positive number means that we need to order more of that particular number. A negative number means that we're underneath the reorder point, or that we have more stock than the reorder point. And 0 means that we're at the reorder point. Now we can search for items, we can search for inventory locations, and we can also search for quantities available and reorder points. So with that, I'd like to conclude our Business Academy AR and AP session. I'd like to open about 5 to 10 minutes for any questions that anybody may have. If you don't have any questions, please feel free to leave our Business Academy session. And once again, thank you all for not only registering, but attending our Business Academy session today.